Good evening, dear friends. And here we are, right back at Tanya, firing our Tanya class right back up. And welcome on board. We are holding now at chapter 9. And I sent out this morning the handouts. You all got it? Chapter 9 handouts. Now, chapter 9 is a very, very special place in Tanya because, let me first say this. Besides the division of chapters, the Alter Rebbe does not indicate any other type of division within the book of Tanya, the 53 chapters of the Tanya. But at the same time, it's very evident when you learn Tanya that different chapters are clustered together, and there'll be a few chapters dedicated to one theme, and then it will move on to a different theme. And it's very evident that chapter 1 through 8 is one unit. And chapter 9 means that we have successfully concluded the first unit of Tanya, chapter 1 through 8. Chapter 9, in a certain way, is a real, we've graduated, and we're ready now for the next level of studying Tanya. So we're at a wonderful place, and it's also a very exciting place because chapter 1 through 8 is the heavy lifting. It's very concept heavy, chapter 1 through 8. But that's what the Alter Rebbe needs to do. Let's put it this way. And I believe I gave you this analogy earlier. But when you go to medical school, right? Who of you here are doctors? We have Dr. Lieb. Who else? Anybody else here is a doctor? All right. So when you go to medical school, not that I've ever been in medical school, but this is so I hear, before you could learn about the specifics, how to treat, how to diagnose, to understand the way everything works, the way things are connected, the first year of medical school is simply gross anatomy. What is the anatomy? What is going on under the hood of the human body? And then once you know what all the moving pieces are, where they all are, what they're called, then you can start understanding a little bit more specifically in context. What do they do? How do they function? What's a malfunction? How do you fix it? How do you diagnose it? What's healthy? What's not healthy? And that's the way it works. You need to first know the concepts before we actually go to address it and study them on a practical level. So before the practical study, we first need to have just simply the concepts. We have to have them out on the table. Another little example, before you bake a cake. So baking is very hands-on, but before you can start baking, you have to have a list of all the ingredients. You have to make sure that you have all the ingredients. So the first thing in every single recipe, before the directions, are ingredients. Once you have ingredients, now we can get to work. Tanya is very much the same way. Tanya is here to walk us through and help us understand our own internal life, our spiritual life, our struggles, our successes, how to develop ourselves into better people, into spiritual people. But we can't do that until we simply understand what are the ingredients, what's the gross anatomy. So chapters 1 through 8 was the Alter Rebbe not so much giving us directions, not giving us insight so much. It was really just, here are the concepts. Here's what you have to know. Once you know chapter 1 through 8, now we could get, the rubber could hit the pavement now. So in a certain way, Tanya really starts coming to life in chapter 9 and onward. And I said this in the email, I want to say this again. Even though I'm saying that you need to know chapters 1 through 8 in order to learn the rest of Tanya, don't give up if you say, I missed half the classes, I missed certain chapters. Maybe I should just give up now. I'm not going to be able to catch up. It's fine. Don't worry. Every class, my goal is that every class should be meaningful and accessible. And yeah, of course, the more we know, the more we can understand everything. But it's sometimes our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, likes getting us to give up. So we have to strengthen ourselves and don't give up. And God willing, will be rewarding. So here we are. We're at chapter 9. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to give a very quick overview of the main points of chapter 1 through 8, and then we're going to jump to chapter 9. But before I do that, I want to make a special mention and make a l'chaim. This is not real l'chaim. This is just a little bit of coffee. But I maybe should have prepared some real l'chaim. Tonight is the Alter Rebbe's yahrzeit, the 24th of Teves, the author of the Tanya. And a yahrzeit in Jewish tradition is a very, very special day. It's a day where the soul, especially the soul of a tzaddik, shines in the world. This is their special day. So it's very meaningful, very apropos that we are all here together studying Tanya on the Alter Rebbe's yahrzeit. Okay, so special mention for that. What happened until now in Tanya? There was so much going on. This is, I believe, our 22nd class. And we're learning for about a year now. We started last year, end of December. Now it's January 16th. Wow, time's flying. So we've been doing this for a year. That's a very long time. So kind of what's the trajectory here? Let's put this down very quickly and as focused as possible. Tanya begins by introducing us to three types of people, three characters, based on the teachings of our sages. The three characters are called a tzaddik, a rasha, and a beinoni, which colloquially is translated as tzaddik is a righteous person. Rasha is usually translated as a bad person or wicked person or evil person. And then beinoni literally means somewhere in between, average. And the Alter Rebbe says it's very evident that understanding what these types of categorizations are is very important to us understanding our mission in life. But what the Alter Rebbe does in chapter 1 is he shows us that pinning down the exact meaning, the exact definition of tzaddik and rasha and beinoni is very difficult. So what the Alter Rebbe says is, let's put the conversation on hold. And for the past few chapters of Tanya, we haven't even mentioned the words tzaddik, rasha, or beinoni. We're going to get back to those terms in the next chapter. But what the Alter Rebbe said is we have to start getting a deep dive. The Alter Rebbe really took us into the deep end of understanding what is under our own hood. What is ticking within us? And the Alter Rebbe taught us like this. Every single Jew possesses two souls. Not one soul, two souls. We don't have one identity, we have two identities. Right? There's not one you, there are two yous. We're very complex people. We're very dynamic. These two souls are called, one is called the animal soul, one is called the divine soul. The animal soul is very self-centered. It's just like an animal. It's very focused on itself, on self-preservation, self-perpetuation. It's looking for its own comfort, for its own pleasures. That's it. That's the animal soul. You could say it's really an instinctive human drive or the impulsive human drive within us. That's the animal soul. Then we have a divine soul. A divine soul is a very, very unique force within us. It is totally not, it has no ego. It is not at all self-centered. It's a very, very special force that is a piece of God that is within every single Jew. And its entire worldview, its entire existence surrounds God and holiness. And it's not at all self-absorbed. It has no self-interests. That's what the divine soul is. So these two souls are really polar opposites. They couldn't be any more different. The animal soul begins and ends with me, the I, the ego. Everything begins with me and ends with me. That's the way it sees everything in life. It's all about me. Not necessarily in an overtly narcissistic way, but just the world revolves around me. That's the way it automatically, that's its default position on everything. The godly soul is exactly the opposite. It's never about itself. It's always about God, my mission, my purpose, holiness. That's the divine soul. The Alter Rebbe then taught us a little bit about the structure of these souls. Each of these souls have the exact same structure. Each of these souls have 10 soul powers. There are 3 intellectual soul powers. There are 7 emotional soul powers. So let's just recap very briefly. What is an intellectual soul power? Intellectual soul power means you have a way that you process reality. You have a way how you process your experiences, your consciousness, the way you think. That's your soul. There's a way that you process things, the way that you understand things around you, the way you cognitively take in the world around you. That's the intellect. And then there's emotions. We all have emotions. We all have emotional associations with things. We have an emotional association to our children. We have an emotional association to our car. We have an emotional association to our money. We have an emotional association to our jobs. It could be a good emotional association, it could be a bad emotional association. But these are the emotions. Emotions come from the soul. There are 7 emotions, the range of emotions. So each of these souls, independently, these are 2 totally separate and independent souls within you. Each one of them have 3 intellectual powers and 7 emotional powers. Right? There's the way the godly soul understands and perceives and relates to the world, and there's the way it feels about the world and everything that it ever comes in contact with. And the animal soul has its own way of seeing and perceiving and identifying and relating cognitively to the world, and it has a way about feeling about it. 10 soul powers. And let me just remind you the terms. The 3 emotional soul powers, the 3 intellectual soul powers are in Hebrew are Chachma, Bina, and Das. You remember those terms? Right? Which is, the literal translation is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Okay, but the literal translation doesn't add any real meaning to it. Okay, so 3 intellectual powers, 7 emotional powers. Okay. And last point that you have to remember, each soul has the internal soul powers, the way it thinks and the way it feels. And then each soul has 3 layers of garments. Garments is the Kabbalistic code word for modes of expression. So our souls could express itself. It could be an active expression. When is our soul an active expression? What are the 3 modes of expression? They are thought, speech, and action. Whenever I'm actively doing something, we make a choice that now I'm going to engage in this activity. And there's a soul that's the motivation behind that activity. So for example, you all made a choice tonight. Your choice was that you are going to log in to this Tanya class at 7:30. You didn't have to make that choice. I can maybe even take a guess that some of you were a little bit deliberative over it. I don't know. I'm a little bit busy. I'm a little bit tired. I'm too tired for a Tanya class. Too hard, too deep. Maybe, but then he made a choice. No, you know what? I don't want to miss. I'm going to join the class. That was a choice. In other words, that's a mode of expression. You could think a certain way, you could feel a certain way, then you can act upon it. That's an expression. So you could do an action. You could also speak. Speaking is a choice. It's an expression. And then there's thought, active thought. Active thought is also an expression. The idea that we will focus time and mental energy on thinking and meditating about this issue, about whatever it is. That's an expression. That's a mode. That's a behavior. Right? Some people think that our thoughts are not choices. Our thoughts are not behaviors. And the real truth is that that's not true. Active thought. We're not talking about an impulse, like a quick impulse that just all of a sudden your mind is just out of nowhere was hit with a certain thought. We're talking about active thought. The idea that you're going to spend time and think about something, that is a choice. And that's a mode of expression of a soul. So again, let's think about it. Every soul, each of the souls, has the way it thinks about stuff. Then it has the way it feels about those stuff. And then there are behaviors that it could do based on what it knows and what it feels. So here's an example, okay? I'm gonna give you a personal example. A few nights ago, in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m., I wake up. I'm usually not the type of sleeper that wakes up in the middle of the night. I usually am able to sleep pretty much through the night. But for the past few weeks, I've had a newborn baby in my bedroom. So waking up in the middle of the night is became pretty common. So at 3 a.m., I wake up, okay. And instead of falling right back asleep, my mind starts wandering to something that's been bothering me lately, which is somebody hurt me, not physically, right? And it hurt my feelings, and I was a little bit worked up about it. And all of a sudden, it happened a few months ago, but all of a sudden, a few nights ago, it falls into my head. And I'm sitting there in bed, and I'm literally starting to, just go on this resentment journey, a meditative resentment journey. And I'm replaying things, and I'm coming up with ideas of what I would say, what I should say, what I could say. And after like 2 or 3 minutes of me kind of getting into this whole thought journey, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm crazy. This happened a few months ago. The whole thing is over. What am I even doing here? Just go back to sleep. And that's what I did. I just shut it out of my brain. I probably tried to think about something else. And I fell back asleep probably within 30 seconds. That's the whole story. But the idea is that the thoughts that we actively engage in really are an active expression. It's an active behavior. It's a choice that we're going to do that right now. We're going to spend time. We can either spend time doing something. We can spend time talking about something. We can also spend time thinking something. And that's an active choice. So that's the structure. We have 2 souls. Each one has 10 internal soul powers, intellect and emotion. And then each soul has 3 garments, 3 modes of expression. The way these souls express themselves. On one foot, that is chapters 1 through 8. Now, of course, we also spoke about a lot of other things, and we went into a lot of depth in a lot of these concepts. And we also dedicated a few chapters to the concept of holiness, kedusha, and kalipa, what the opposite of holiness. The whole idea that the godly soul is holy and the animal soul is not holy, it's klipa. So we've really gotten our hands, very involved in all that stuff. But this is what we have to know. We have 2 souls, and now we understand the structure. We know what they are. We know gross anatomy. Now we are finally ready to start exploring the way these souls live within us. We've been introduced to the cast. We know who the players are. Now let the drama begin. Okay? So chapter 9 takes us right into our own bodies. And it will start talking and teaching us about the drama that is happening within me, within you, within each and every one of us. The drama between the 2 souls that are currently living within our own bodies. So, without any further ado, let's begin chapter 9. Let's read. And as always, we'll read, I'll explain. If you have any questions, make sure to ask. And most questions I'll get to now. Some questions I may decide that I want to wait till 8:30 if it'll be a little bit too off topic or too derailing. But right, in any case, let us begin learning. Chapter 9. All right, and I would just want to make a little mention just to say good evening to all those who I didn't get a chance to wish good evening to yet, which came on a drop late. So I want to wish all of you good evening. Sharon and Joyce and Gila and Elke and Yulia and David and Michelle and Leah and Amanda and Fran. I don't think I got a chance to wish a good evening to you guys. So Good evening, good evening. It's wonderful seeing all of you. It's wonderful studying with all of you. Okay, chapter 9. It is page 86, although page 86 doesn't have a page number, right? The page before page 87. Chapter 9, our chapter is titled The Battle of the Souls. Pretty dramatic title, no? Okay. Part 1, the centers of the souls in your body. Okay, let me introduce to you what's going to happen here. Let's actually read. Let's read. Now, each of the two souls have an abode, a location in the body which it inhabits and is most present there. So we have two souls, and what the author is going to say is they live inside our body. These are not physical stuff, right? You can't see them in an X-ray, but there's two spiritual forces that are literally within a space in your body. And that is kind of the headquarters of that soul. That is where that soul is most manifest. And that is the starting point of the soul within you, which means there's literally a point within you where each of these two souls emerge. And that's their headquarters. Okay, so you got to think about it. There's your body is a home to a whole world, right? The body is really a world. You have two headquarters, two spiritual headquarters within your body. Let's begin with the animal soul. Let's read. The abode of the animal soul of Klipat Noga in every Jewish person is in the left ventricle of the heart that is filled with oxygenated blood. As it's written in the Torah, for the blood is the soul. So where is the animal soul's headquarters? It's in the heart, and specifically in the left chamber, the left ventricle of the heart. Okay, so I am not a doctor. Dr. Lieb will correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, but I want to teach all of you a little bit of biology right now, all right? I'll teach you a little bit of, how do you call it? The cardio, whatever, right? Something, I'll teach you a little bit about the heart, the way the heart works. So the way the heart works is like this. Your heart has two sides, the right side and the left side. And of course, the heart is the one responsible of spreading blood throughout our entire body. And blood is life, right? If there's any body part that doesn't get blood, it doesn't take too long before that body part will become dead. Every body part needs blood. Blood gives us literally the vitality of life. It gives us oxygen. Every body part needs oxygen. So the way it works is that we have this very intricate system of veins, and blood is flowing through every single part of our body. And the way it works is like this. The blood enters the heart on the right side, right? The right side of the heart, blood enters. The blood that enters the right side of your heart is dead blood, is lifeless blood. In other words, there's no oxygen in that blood. It has given oxygen to the whole body. By the time blood returns back to the heart, it's out of oxygen. So the right chamber, the right ventricle of your heart has blood, but it's what we call lifeless blood, dead blood. No oxygen. The right side of the blood pumps the blood to our lungs. The blood flows through the lungs, receives oxygen, it becomes oxygenated. And then from the lungs, the blood then goes to the left side of the heart, the left ventricle. The left ventricle is filled with fresh, full of warm, hot, bubbling, oxygenated blood of life. And the left ventricle of the heart sends the blood throughout the entire body and gives the body life. So the blood of life comes from our left ventricle, the left side of the heart. Dr. Lieb, am I on point with that? Oh, okay. I thought you were going to tell me, no, there's really 4 chambers. Yeah, you're right. There's 4 chambers of the heart. But even the four chambers, it's really two sides. There's the right side, there's the left side. Okay, but that's where the doctors are going to quibble with me, right? Oh, Dr. Lieb says I did perfect. Thank you. There you go. Now, I'll tell you the truth. I don't know this from biology. I know this from Tanya. What I just shared with you, the Tanya says. Now, I went online to make sure that Dr. Lieb is not going to be throwing eggs at me. What are you saying? You get the whole thing wrong. But the Tanya got it right. It matches what modern biology says. But this is an old Jewish thing. It discusses the way the heart works, and the heart is a spiritual utensil as well, as we will learn. So there's the right side, there's the left side. Right side has dead blood, no oxygen. Left side has freshly oxygenated blood, which then goes into the bloodstream of the body, gets pumped out back to the body. Now, your animal soul, its headquarters, is in the left side of the heart. Left side of the heart is where your animal soul is. And your animal soul, which is the soul that gives us biological life, flows through our bloodstream. The blood doesn't only carry oxygen, but it carries the spiritual life force of the animal soul throughout us. Okay? And this is what the verse says. We bring it down from the Torah. For the blood is the soul. Blood, the soul is in blood. That is where the soul of man travels. It's within the blood. And we're talking about the animal soul, right? We're talking about the animal soul. Okay, let's keep on reading. For this reason, all impulses of the animal soul, such as cravings and boasting and anger and the like, come from your heart. The animal soul is always felt emerging from the heart. That's where you're going to feel the expression and the impulse and the instincts, and all the pings of your animal soul come from the heart. Let's continue. From your heart, the impulses of the animal soul travels throughout your entire body. It rises also to your head, to your brain, where those feelings which emerged in the heart are thought about, contemplated, and schemed upon by the intellect of the animal soul. So this is a very important idea to understand how the animal soul functions within us. What we have to understand is like this. The animal soul has intellect. The animal soul has emotions. What Tanya is teaching us is that the animal soul is primarily emotional. Its starting point is emotional. The intellect is only there to help and assist the emotional instinct and the emotional impulse. I'll give you a little bit of an example. I'll give you an example from literal animals, all right? Animals are known to be unbelievably sophisticated beings. They're very smart. And we all know that there are certain animals that we know that their brains, compared to human brains, are super brains. You know, there are certain animals and certain birds that can make unbelievably sophisticated mathematical calculations, pinpoint, to exact measurements on the fly. Certain predatory animals. They know exactly how fast they need to run, at what angle, and when to jump, and everything they have figured out. So are animals smart? No question about it. But let me ask you a question. Will you ever see an animal engaged in math? I'm learning math. Why are you learning math? Oh, I'm smart. What do you mean? I'm just learning math. You'll never catch an animal engaged in intellect itself. Because as smart as they are, they're not intellectual beings. All of their brains are only there to support the animalistic instincts. And that's it. There's no independent intellectual capability here. So are certain animals capable of very complex math? Yes, but they'll never actually study math. They can't. The whole brain is there simply to support the animal. Wisdom itself is not a thing. Our animal souls are exactly the same way. Our animal souls, just like regular animals, are purely impulsive. The starting point of the life of the animal soul is its emotional outputs. What does it like? What does it love? What does it hate? What does it appreciate? The whole range of emotions. Once it has an emotion, then it will use its intellect to support its emotion, to give depth to its emotions, to give depth to its desires, to scheme how to get it, to scheme how to rationalize our desire to do it, right? So the animal soul is never going to sit back and say, let's really think what's important to do in life. What's the meaning of life? The animal soul is never going to think about things objectively. Everything always begins from a very, very biased, a very subjective, a very emotionally impulsive starting point. I like this, I don't like that. I want this, I want to get that. And all the brains of the animal soul are simply secondary, are simply supporting the emotion of the animal soul. That's a very important thing to know. Animal soul is always impulsive, always emotional. That's always where it begins. So the animal soul begins in the heart and then pumps its energy out to the entire body, including the brain. All right, let's keep on reading. It all follows the same course as your blood, which begins in the reservoir of the heart, and from the heart is pumped out to all your limbs and organs, rising to the brain within your head as well. That's the animal soul. So we all have an animal soul, and it literally it resides in your heart, specifically in the left ventricle. In your left ventricle, you have your animal soul. All right, so the animal soul is not some ethereal concept somewhere out there. You have a literal animal soul right there inside of you. All right, we don't yet have an MRI machine that could detect it, but maybe one day. It's there. It's in your left side of the heart. Okay, next page. What about the divine soul? Let's read. But the place where the divine soul rests and is most present is in the brain in your head. Headquarters from the divine soul is in your brain. Your brain has within it the divine soul. From there, the divine soul extends outward to all the limbs and organs. So we have two different headquarters. One soul is in the left side of the heart. One soul, the divine soul, is in the brain, which means the divine soul, its starting point is always in the intellect. All right, that's an important idea. Let's keep on reading. A little twist here. But the divine soul also has a second abode in the heart, in the right ventricle, where there is no oxygenated blood. As the verse goes, the heart of a sage is to his right side. So we have to visualize this. The godly soul, the divine soul, has two headquarters. It has the main headquarters, which is the brain, and then it has like a satellite station, right? A satellite headquarters, which is secondary. It's not primary. Primary is the brain, the right side of the heart. So the divine soul and the animal soul are neighbors. Animal soul is on the left side of the heart. The divine soul is on the right side of the heart, right? Animal left, divine right. Which means, let's think about this. I want to explain this to you. The animal soul is purely emotional. Intellect is not important on its own to the animal soul. The animal soul will use the intellect only as much as it helps its emotional impulses. So here's an example. Did you ever catch yourself doing something emotionally? And then later on, after you did it, you'll start giving all these wonderful and very brilliant excuses why what you did was a good idea. We call that rationalizing, right? Rationalizing is a fancy word, or it's called making up excuses, right? That's what the animal soul does for business, you know. It does things and then it figures out how to rationalize why we did it, why it was a good idea, why I had the right to do it, how we did it. So it's not, there's no independent appreciation of intellect on its own from the perspective of the animal soul. The intellect is only there as a support cast of the emotions. The divine soul works very differently. It's the opposite. The divine soul begins with intellect. It needs to develop its worldview based on the transcendence that the mind gives you. You know, the heart is very, very subjective. The heart is very, very self-centered. Even just think about it biologically. What does a heart do? A heart is giving you life. That's the whole function of the heart. So the heart is all about feeding my existence, keeping my existence going. So it makes a lot of sense that the animal soul lives in the heart, because that's what the animal soul is all about. It's all about me. It's all about keeping my existence going. The divine soul is all about transcendence, is the opposite, right? It's all about, there's a certain humility. The divine soul lives beyond your ego, beyond your own needs and wants and survival. And if you think about it, what part of the body gives you the opportunity to transcend yourself, to rise beyond yourself? The one part of the body, both biologically as well as psychologically, the one part of the body that gives you the gift of transcendence is the brain. Because what does the brain do? The power of the mind, the power of your intellect is to explore something objectively. Explore something coolly. I'm not going to be all emotionally attached. I'm not going to be all emotionally invested to the point that I'm blinded. Let's pursue something. Kabbalah speaks about this. The mind is the source of human humility. And I'll tell you something, and it's a compliment to all of us. Some people, and it's a little bit tragic, I don't mean to put anybody down, but it's a little bit tragic when you see it. Some people are simply not capable of studying. It's not because they're not smart. You can be very, very smart, but they simply cannot study. Now, for some reason, it's very unfortunate, but in the modern world, studying becomes like a thing. I know, we're all learning together, so I know that I'm preaching to the choir right now. But in the Western world, studying is like what you do as a youth. Well, you go to school when you're a kid, when you go to college. Then as an adult, what are you studying? You're bored. You're gonna go study? It's a waste of time. Studying is the way we humans grow. What do we do when we study? The art of studying, especially Torah, is we are exposing ourselves. We're being very vulnerable in order to allow something new to enter into our consciousness. And studying in a certain way breaks apart who we were before. It breaks apart our worldview. It breaks apart our paradigms, the box that we live in. And true learning expands our horizons and lets us grow, lets us be new people. That's real studying. So, I'll just tell you something. Real studying is meant to confuse you. Real studying is meant to shake you up a little bit. If you ever learn Tanya and you feel a little bit confused and you feel like what you always assumed was just a little bit shattered, that is amazing. That's the magic of study. There's such humility there. It's such a special power. You are right now in the middle of reimagining yourself. You are really growing. You're cognitively and emotionally growing. We're allowing something very deep and very powerful to teach us and to lift us up. And I'll just tell you, some people, I'll never tell this to anybody, but there are some people, you could see it in them when they study. They don't They have such resistance to hearing something new. If there's something that they read or study or hear that goes against a prior assumption, they freak out. They totally freak out, and they won't accept it. No, but I always thought, and I learned before, and it doesn't make any sense. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. It doesn't make any sense. I don't accept it. That's a deficiency. That's a very bad thing. That means that you're not coming with humility. Humility is the power of the brain. So really, whenever we study, especially Torah, we are coming and saying, we're making ourselves very vulnerable. We're saying, lift me up. Take me somewhere where I never was before. So the real truth is, if you ever study something, for an hour and a half, and you left saying, I'm very confused. I really didn't understand what we just learned. I read it. It was too deep. It was too crazy. I couldn't make heads and tails of it. That is amazing. That is amazing. I'm going off on a tangent over here, but that is literally amazing. Sometimes things have to break before you can build something new. So that's a very healthy thing of just giving time and space for your mind and your heart to be uplifted to a place where you weren't there before. So the mind, let's get back to the point. And I just want to say, it's an amazing thing that all of you are studying, especially Tanya. I know Tanya especially keeps on doing that to us. Tanya just blows our mind and shatters our prior assumptions and forces us to think about life and spirituality in whole new ways. And it's very, very special. And if you hold out and you do it, there's something very magical about that. So the brain is, getting back to the point, the brain is a seat of the divine soul. That's a natural fit. If you had to kind of find one body part that best matches the nature, the identity of the divine soul, of the godly soul, the brain is the best place, because the brain is the part within you which has an appreciation, which has a knack for transcendence, to rise beyond the ego. But the divine soul is not just a cold emotion, it's not just a cold intellectual soul. It's not a geek. Geeks are just cold. Cold and lifeless, right? A real geek is emotionless, right? That's a real geek. A geek has emotion, that's not a real geek. I hope I'm not offending anybody. Or just to help, just in case I didn't offend anybody before, that's also what professors are. What's a professor? Is anybody here a professor? The definition of a professor is somebody who is steeped in knowledge for no point. Cold, ice cold knowledge. Why is this knowledge important? How did it change your life? What's the point? We don't know, we don't care. It's good information. So when we say that when we say that the divine soul is intellectual, is primarily intellectual, it's not a geek, it's not a cold professor. It also has headquarters in the heart. Emotions is very important for the divine soul. It all begins with intellect, but the intellect gives birth to emotions. And the divine soul is absolutely a very emotional being. But where does his emotions come from? It only comes from intellect. The divine soul does not really have impulsive emotions. So here, I'll give you an example. How long did it take for you to develop a love for ice cream? Assuming that everybody here loves ice cream. How long did it take? Like, was it something that you had to kind of spend days and weeks and months meditating on until, I finally fell in love with ice cream? Chances are that your love affair with ice cream was very rapid, right? Love on first sight. You've seen it, you smell it, you taste it. The deal is done. You'll love ice cream for the rest of your life. That's the animal soul. Very emotional, very impulsive. It's right there. The emotions are flowing out right away. Well, let's talk about something that stems from the divine soul. What about the love for a mitzvah? What about a love for Judaism? What about the love for Torah study? What about the love of God? What about the love of a fellow Jew? What about the love and all the emotions, the love, the reverence, the appreciation, the awe, the trepidation? chances are these emotions, they ain't just come out of nowhere. These emotions take a lot of work to develop. And the only way that we'll develop an emotional connection with holy stuff, with godly stuff, is only if we study about them, meditate upon them, cognitively connect with these ideas to the point that the emotions start emerging. So the animal soul is primarily emotional, not just primarily emotion, it's all emotion. That's what it is. Everything else is just supporting emotions. It's the divine soul, the godly soul. It's primarily intellectual, but it's not exclusively intellectual. It's intellectual, but it's also very emotional. But the emotions are secondary to the intellect. Now, what does this mean? The author is going to give us two quick examples of the idea that the divine soul's intellect gives birth to emotions. Let's read. This nexus of the divine soul in your mind and heart produces the holy emotions of the divine soul. Such as, what's an example of the emotions of the divine soul? Such as the emotion of love for God. A love like the glowing coals of flames that burst forth in the hearts of those who are capable of understanding and contemplating in their minds those matters that awaken the love of God. So you probably don't love God like you do ice cream and the way you love your new car. Right? A new car is such a joy, right? Oh, it works well, it's clean. You take it on joy rides. That's the definition of love. You spend time with it. Where are you going? I'm not going anywhere. I'm just spending time with my car. That's love. So you could love God, but it's not going to be automatic because the animal soul doesn't love God. It's kind of out of its worldview. But if you think about God enough, you study enough about God, you study the things that arouse the love of God, then the divine soul develops a love. And there's a love called love like glowing coals. All right, we'll be talking about all these different types of loves later on. And by the way, there are later chapters in Tanya where the author is going to give us the full rundown of what these meditations are. What are the meditations, practical meditations that we could study about and learn about and think about that will practically lead us to developing emotions towards God, a love of God, an appreciation of God, an awe of God. What are these meditations? We'll get there. We'll get there. And if any of you joined, last year we did a course called Meditations from Sinai. And there we did a few samplings, a few classes were dedicated to the big ideas that we could study about, the Torah teaches us. We learn about God's relationship with us, God's relationship with the world. And these ideas change the way we think about God, change the way we feel about God. Okay? Or there's another example. Or another example of the divine soul's intellect and emotion working together, or it can produce the heart's joy in God's beauty and in the glory of his transcendence. When the eyes of a wise person, which are in his head, meaning the mental powers of Chachma and Bina, gaze upon the glory of the King and upon the unfathomable, endless, and limitless beauty of his greatness. This method of meditation is explained elsewhere. Here's an interesting type of emotion. There's a certain thing called the heart's joy, heartfelt joy, in seeing something beautiful and seeing something awesome. So, for example, you go to the Grand Canyon and you see awesomeness. You're witnessing awesomeness, and you stand there. And you say, ooh, and you say, ah, and you spend an hour looking and looking and looking and looking. And you're filled with emotion. There's the emotion of taking in beauty. There's the emotion of taking in awesomeness. Same thing with Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls, you go there, and people go there to watch water falling. What are you looking at? And what are you looking at for more than 10 seconds? It's the same thing, water's falling. People will be there for 10 minutes, a half hour, an hour. We're watching water falling. We humans, one of our emotions is appreciating beauty. And we get very filled with emotion. It's a very emotionally charged experience. The divine soul, it's another type of emotion. There's the love of God. We spoke about that just before. Another example of an emotion is the emotion of witnessing, of gazing, not physically, but gazing with the eye of the mind, right? Gazing and understanding and just simply, it's a certain sense of appreciation, of witnessing, cognitively witnessing God's greatness, God's beauty, God's infinity. That's it. Now, how do you get there? It sounds a little bit holy, no? It sounds a little bit out of reach. There's meditations for it. Now's not the place to get into it, but we'll get there. But these are examples of how the animal soul works. It's mainly intellectual, and it also is very emotional. That's the secondary headquarters. Okay, let's conclude here. Bottom of page 87. The same applies to all the other holy emotions of the heart. They all come from the Chachma, Bina, and Das of the brain. So there we have it. We have a godly soul, a divine soul. We have an animal soul. They literally live within our bodies. Right? We have two very real, powerful spiritual forces within us. They walk around with us the whole day. They're not next to us, right? They're not companion angels. They're inside of you. They are you. You are only ticking because of these two souls within you. There's an animal soul in the left side of your heart. There's the divine soul in your brain and also in the right side of your heart. And these are two forces within you. Now, next week, starting on page 88, we'll be learning about the interactions between these two souls. You could think, you know what? It sounds like a great arrangement. Each soul has its own separate place. You know, you have your own lodgings, you have your own dormitory room. You know, it just seemed like everybody should be able to get along. But as we're going to see, there's a tremendous tension between the divine soul and the animal soul. And we'll be learning about that battle, about that drama, God willing, next week. It's not a pretty sight. And that tension, that drama is playing out within every single one of us, every single day, and every single moment of our lives. But I'll just tell you, just as we conclude today's class, a little inspiring idea. That what we've learned is actually very practically meaningful and gives us a lot of practical guidance. Because sometimes we'll have a certain idea, a certain agenda, a certain thought process. And we could wonder, you know, is this my ego of my animal soul talking? Or is this the holy impulse of my divine soul? You know, which soul is telling me to do this? And you wonder, what's the right thing to do? What would be the holy decision to make? But it's not always so easy, right? The animal soul doesn't always show up as some nasty guy. The animal soul can sometimes show up and say some very nice ideas. But at the same time, sometimes it's a struggle. We're going to be learning about this, to be in touch and to try to follow through with the divine soul's agenda more than with the animal soul's agenda. So sometimes it's hard to pinpoint which soul is telling me to do this. So here's the way it works. If an idea comes from the heart, it usually is from the animal soul. Which means if it's an emotionally impulsive decision, it's probably the animal soul. If it is something that stems from a logical, proper thought process, good chance that that's from the divine soul, because that's the way these two souls work. I'll tell you a little story. We'll conclude with this story. There's once a Hasidic Rebbe, and the way this Hasidic Rebbe did his business, he had a court, he had followers, and a few nights, once a week, once a month, whatever it was, this Hasidic Rebbe would accept visitors for private counseling and private meetings. The way he had his office run his affairs was, first, the wealthy people should come. because the wealthy people would come to the Rebbe, and very often they usually would leave a little donation. They would give to the rabbi's discretionary fund. They come visit the Rebbe, I'm leaving you with some money. And then the Rebbe told his secretary to have all the poor people come in the second half of the night. Because the poor people come with their tsaros, with their problems. I need to marry off my daughter. I don't have any money. And like this, the Rebbe could then distribute the money that he got from the rich people. The poor people come first. The Rebbe's going to have to send them away empty-handed. And then... So here's a little story. The Rebbe, I don't know which Rebbe, this is the story from back in Europe, one of the Hasidic Rebbes in Europe. The way the story goes is that the Rebbe it's the official night where he's seeing visitors, and all the rich people come and they all leave money and donations and charity. They trust that the Rebbe is going to be able to distribute the money for good causes. And then the second half of the evening begins, where the poor people come. And right away, somebody poor comes in. He needs a lot of money. And the Rebbe hears the amount that this person needs. He needs to marry off a child. And the Rebbe sees it's exactly the money that he has that came in the evening. Exactly what he has is what he could give right now and totally save this person. So the Rebbe says, oh, this is perfect. It's an amazing divine providence. I'll take the money. I'll give it to him right now. But then the Rebbe starts thinking, 1 second, if I give it to him now, then there's a bunch of other people waiting to see me. I'm not going to have anything to give to them. So instead of giving him all the money, I should divide it into 10 different sections. I'll give him a 10th. I can't give him everything. He's not going to. But the Rebbe was all of a sudden plagued that he has 2 different voices within him. There's 2 different impulses. His initial thought was give him all the money. All of a sudden, he has a second thought that just popped into his brain. No, don't give him all the money. Only give him. He sent the poor man out. He says, I need some time to think. He told his secretary that the meetings are paused until further notice. He spent a few hours in meditation, trying to decipher which soul was giving him which message. Which soul was telling him, give him all the money? Which soul was saying, that's reckless, only give him a 10th? And after long contemplation, he came to the conclusion that it was the godly soul, the divine soul, that was saying, give him all the money. And it was the animal soul who was saying, no, it's reckless, only give him a 10th. How he came to that conclusion is for another time. It's already 8:31. I don't want to keep you here too late. But there's a certain art. Most ideas that we come up with sound like good ideas. Yeah, let's do this, let's do that. There's an art of being in touch with the divine soul. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Sometimes it's very difficult to know which soul is guiding us, which impulse is worth engaging in with, which one's not. And that's part of the art. So the first step of the art of navigating our 2 souls, divine soul is intellectual. That's its starting point. The animal soul is very emotional, very impulsive. That's the first marker, the first tip of how to know from which one where is coming. But in any case, there we go. We began our exploration of where the souls are within our body. Next week, the battle begins. Okay. And with that, we conclude. I want to thank all for joining. I want to wish you all a wonderful evening, wonderful night. Thank you for joining. We're back on the road with Tanya.